My name is Clarissa, and I'm 58 years old. I still remember the day my classmates laughed at my torn shoes like it was yesterday. The day I walked into that boardroom, every head turned, especially hers. Bianca, the girl who once laughed at my torn shoes, sat trembling across the table while I signed the papers that made her family business mine. But what she didn't know was that the man who destroyed my father's life had once unknowingly paid for my education. And that truth was the final twist in a story I never saw coming. The memory is burned into me, as sharp and humiliating as the moment it happened. I was 15, standing in the middle of the hallway of Crestwood High, clutching my worn-out books while a group of girls burst into laughter behind me. My shoes' faded brown loafers with a slit near the toe had given up that morning, and I tried to hide it with glue and tape. But Bianca noticed. She always noticed. Bianca, Serena, and Chelsea, the golden trio of Crestwood. They were daughters of businessmen, always arriving in shiny cars, their perfume clouding the hallways, their laughter echoing like victory bells. I, on the other hand, walked to school, rain or shine, in clothes my mother had mended more times than I could count. I carried homemade sandwiches wrapped in wax paper while they flaunted takeout lunches that smelled of money. I still remember the way Bianca tilted her head at me, smirking as if she had discovered a new species. "Did your shoes come free with the charity box again, Clarissa?" she sneered, and her friends laughed until their eyes teared up. I wanted to disappear right there. My cheeks burned, but I forced myself to keep walking, pretending their words didn't stab like needles. My only comfort came from Nora, my quiet friend with kind eyes and a gentle heart. She walked beside me every day, whispering, "Ignore them, Clarissa. You'll show them one day." But it was hard to ignore. The laughter followed me into classrooms, whispered behind notebooks, and scribbled across bathroom walls. Even teachers, who should have protected me, looked away when Bianca mocked me aloud. They wouldn't risk upsetting the daughters of Crestwood's biggest donors. I learned early that money didn't just buy clothes, it bought silence. At home, life wasn't much easier, though it was full of love. My father worked long shifts at the factory, coming home with grease-stained hands and a tired smile. My mother washed clothes for neighbors to make ends meet. Despite everything, they never let me feel unloved. My father used to tell me, "One day you'll walk into a room and they'll know your worth before you even speak." I believed him, even when the world didn't. But every morning, when his old pickup truck rumbled in front of the school to drop me off, I'd see the sneers from the rich kids waiting nearby. I'd beg him to stop a block away, embarrassed by the dents in doors and the sputtering sound of the engine. He never took offense. He just smiled sadly and said, "You'll understand someday." One afternoon, we had to present art projects in class. I had spent hours sketching a factory scene dedicated to my father, a tribute to the man who gave everything for our family. When it was my turn, I placed the drawing on the easel. Before I could explain, Bianca pretended to trip and spilled an entire jar of red paint over it and on my thrift store dress. The class erupted in laughter while I stood frozen, humiliated and trembling. The teacher merely sighed, told me to clean up, and moved on. That was the moment something inside me hardened. I wiped the paint off my dress, held my head high, and walked out of the classroom. I didn't cry, not there. But when I got home, I sat on the porch, watching the sky turn orange, and I made myself a promise. I would never let anyone make me feel small again. One day, they would look up to me. One day, I would rise so high that their laughter would echo below me like distant thunder. Nora found me later, holding a sandwich wrapped in a napkin, trying to cheer me up. We sat together under the fading sunlight, silent but understanding each other's pain. That small moment of kindness stayed with me far longer than the cruelty of my classmates. As dusk turned to night, I heard the familiar rumble of my father's truck approaching, but it didn't stop. It roared past the corner, faster than usual, followed by the sound of screeching brakes and shouting. My mother rushed out, panic flooding her face. I ran after her barefoot, my heart pounding, not knowing what awaited us. That evening, when I walked home crying, I didn't know it would be the night I'd lose my father forever. I came home to sirens and flashing lights, and that was how my world collapsed. The image of that night is burned into me as if branded on my soul. I remember running down the street, barefoot and breathless, the smell of burning oil heavy in the air. People were gathered near the factory gates, faces pale, eyes wide. My mother's cries pierced through the noise as paramedics rushed past. The flashing red lights painted everything in a blur of terror and disbelief. I didn't want to understand what was happening, but the moment I saw my father's old work jacket folded neatly on a stretcher, I knew. My knees gave out, and the world went silent. My father, the man who had always come home no matter how hard the day, was gone, taken in an instant by a machine malfunction that crushed him beneath the weight of broken safety systems. The days that followed were a haze of pitying glances and whispered condolences. The factory sent flowers, but no compensation, only a vague promise to investigate. My mother sat on the couch for hours, her eyes blank, her hands twisting the hem of her apron. She hardly ate, hardly spoke. The house, once filled with the hum of my father's stories and the smell of his evening tea, felt hollow. The bills kept arriving, one after another, each one a cruel reminder that the world doesn't stop for grief. I tried to be strong for both of us, but strength doesn't pay rent or buy food. Within a month, we were behind on everything. My mother, too broken to work, stopped taking in laundry. I started looking for part-time jobs after school, though I had no experience and no one wanted to hire a 16-year-old who still smelled of chalk and notebook paper. Finally, Mr. Patel, who owned a small grocery store downtown, took pity and let me clean after closing. It wasn't much, but it was something. The first night I mopped those floors, my hands trembled, not from exhaustion but from shame. I could still hear Bianca's laughter in my head, mocking my old shoes and my father's truck. I wondered what she would say if she saw me now sweeping aisles, wearing an oversized janitor uniform, smelling of detergent instead of perfume. I didn't have to wonder long. A week later, she did see me. She and her friends walked in while I was restocking shelves. I froze, clutching a broom, praying they wouldn't recognize me. But Bianca's grin spread like wildfire when she did. "Well, look who's found her calling," she said, her tone dripping with delight. "Do you take tips, Clarissa? Or should we just drop coins on the floor for you to pick up?" Serena laughed so hard she almost fell against a display of cereal boxes. I wanted to sink into the ground. My face burned as I whispered, "Please, just leave." But Bianca leaned closer, her voice low and venomous. "You'll never be more than this. Girls like you don't climb ladders, they hold them for people like us." That night, when I got home, I cried quietly so my mother wouldn't hear. She was asleep on the couch, the TV flickering shadows across her tired face. I went into my room and took out an old notebook. It had been my father's, filled with sketches of machines he dreamed of inventing one day. I turned to a blank page and began to write, not about sorrow but about the future I still wanted. I wrote that I would finish school, go to college, and build something of my own. Writing became my escape, a small spark in the darkness. At school, my grades began slipping, not from lack of ability but from exhaustion. Between late-night cleaning and early classes, I barely slept. Still, Nora never let me quit. She'd come over to help with assignments, bringing snacks and reminding me that life had to get better. "You're too smart for this place, Clarissa," she'd say. "You have to get out, and I'll help you do it." She was my lifeline when everything else was falling apart. One afternoon, my English teacher, Mrs. Howard, asked me to stay after class. I thought I was in trouble for missing an essay deadline, but instead, she handed me a recommendation form. "Clarissa," she said gently, read your writing. You have a gift. You should apply for scholarships. Don't let circumstances decide your story." Her words cracked something open inside me. For the first time in months, someone saw potential instead of pity. That night, I filled out every scholarship application I could find. Some required essays, others needed transcripts, and all asked for hope I barely had left. Nora helped me polish my words, turning my pain into purpose. Weeks later, I received a thick envelope from a state university. My hands shook as I opened it. "Congratulations," it began. I had been accepted. For a brief, breathtaking moment, I felt like the universe had remembered me. But then, reality hit tuition. Even with a partial scholarship, the costs were more than I could ever afford. I tried not to cry in front of my mother, but she could tell. She took my hands in hers, her eyes glossy but determined. "You'll find a way, my love. Your father believed in you. So do I." But I couldn't see a way. I thought about giving up, taking full-time work, forgetting the dream that had once burned so bright. What good was ambition when the world demanded money you didn't have? Then one evening, after finishing my shift, I found someone waiting outside the store, Mrs. Howard. She smiled softly, holding a plain white envelope. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by," she said. "I heard about your acceptance letter. I couldn't stand by and do nothing." I frowned, confused, as she handed me the envelope. "Just read it when you get home," she said, and then she left before I could thank her properly. I walked home under the streetlights, clutching the envelope to my chest, feeling its weight as if it carried the answer to everything. Inside, I could feel papers, maybe forms, maybe something else. My heart raced with a strange mix of dread and hope. I didn't open it right away. I wanted to savor that moment, the uncertainty before a miracle, the heartbeat between despair and redemption. Just when I thought my future was gone, someone I least expected handed me an envelope that would change my life. Inside that envelope was my ticket out, a full scholarship funded by an anonymous donor. For a long moment, I just stared at the letter, reading the words again and again as if they might vanish if I blinked. A full scholarship. Tuition, housing, books, and even a small living stipend, all covered. My hands trembled as I pressed the paper against my chest. After months of hopelessness, it felt like the universe had finally remembered my name. I ran into the living room, waving the letter in the air, unable to contain myself. My mother looked up, startled, then squinted at the paper. When she realized what it said, she covered her mouth with both hands and began to cry. I hadn't seen her cry out of joy since my father was alive. She pulled me into her arms and whispered through tears, "He would be so proud of you, Clarissa. You did it." That night, we celebrated with a small dinner, instant noodles and tea, but it tasted like a feast. For once, the house felt warm again, filled with something other than grief. My mother talked about all the things she wanted me to learn, how I should never let anyone make me feel small again. I didn't have the heart to tell her that I didn't know who had paid for the scholarship. The letter said it was awarded based on academic excellence and personal resilience, but it was funded by a private donor who wished to remain anonymous. Still, I had a feeling Mrs. Howard had something to do with it. I couldn't think of anyone else who believed in me that much. The weeks that followed were a blur of packing, paperwork, and nervous excitement. I had never left my small town before. The day I boarded the bus for the state university, my mother hugged me tighter than ever. "Go show them who you are," she said softly. "Don't let the past chain you." I promised I wouldn't. As the bus pulled away, I looked out the window at our little house, shrinking in the distance, and whispered to myself that I would make her proud. College was a different world, clean brick buildings, shiny cars, and students dressed like they'd stepped out of magazines. On the first day, I stood outside the main hall feeling completely out of place in my thrift store jeans and hand-me-down coat. I'd imagined freedom. Instead, I felt invisible. Conversations around me were filled with talk of vacations, designer brands, and weekend trips. No one knew what it meant to count coins for lunch. But I reminded myself why I was there. I wasn't there to fit in, I was there to rise. Classes were harder than I expected, but I loved every minute of it. I majored in business and finance, determined to learn how money worked, how it moved, how it built empires, how it destroyed them. I wanted to understand it so I could control it one day. The time I opened a textbook, I remembered the nights my father came home with sore hands and said, "Learn the things I couldn't." Those words became my fuel. To support myself, I took a part-time job at the campus library. The pay was modest, but I didn't mind. The smell of books, the quiet hum of students studying it became my sanctuary. I'd shelve books until late at night, then study under the dim reading lamps. Every dollar I earned went into a small savings envelope I hid inside my drawer. I didn't know what I was saving for yet, but I knew it would matter someday. There were moments of loneliness, too. While others partied or joined social clubs, I spent weekends working or studying. Sometimes I'd overhear groups of students mocking scholarship kids, and though they didn't say my name, I felt the sting as if they had. But the more they whispered, the harder I worked. Slowly, my professors began to notice my dedication. By the end of my first semester, I was top of my class. When I saw my name on the dean's list, I couldn't stop smiling. For the first time, I believed that I was capable of more than just survival. It was during my second year that I joined the Student Entrepreneurship Club. The meetings were intimidating at first, confident voices tossing around big ideas about startups and investments, but something about it lit a fire in me. During one brainstorming session, while others debated luxury tech apps, I pitched an idea about sustainable fabric production using recycled materials. At first, they looked at me like I was speaking another language. But then one of the professors sitting in the back, Professor Daniels, leaned forward and said, "That's actually brilliant." Professor Daniels became my mentor from that day. He was sharp but kind, the type who saw potential before it bloomed. He'd invite me to his office to talk about business strategies and global markets, encouraging me to think beyond limits. He told me, "Clarissa, real success comes from solving real problems. Don't chase money, chase meaning, and the money will follow." His words became a compass I carried quietly within me. Under his guidance, I refined my project idea, researched eco-friendly production methods, and even presented at a small campus event. It didn't win first place, but it caught attention enough for one company representative to tell me, "You have vision, young lady." For someone like me, those words were gold. As semesters passed, I began to feel a balance between my studies and my dreams. I was no longer that girl who hid behind broken shoes and secondhand pride. I was becoming someone new, someone with purpose. My professors respected me, my grades soared, and my name started circulating among the top students in the business department. Yet even as I built this new life, I never forgot where I came from. I sent letters to my mother every week, updating her on every small success. She'd write back with shaky handwriting, always ending with the same line, "Keep going, my bright star." Then, just as everything seemed to settle into place, life reminded me that peace never lasts long. It was the start of my third year when I walked into my advanced finance lecture, notebook in hand, ready to learn. I scanned the room for a seat and froze. There she was, Bianca Harrison. Her hair was the same glossy blonde, her smile still carrying that same cruel curve. She turned, locked eyes with me, and smirked as if the years hadn't passed at all. My breath caught in my throat. The moment I saw Bianca step into the same classroom, smirking like old times, I knew fate wasn't done with us yet. College was supposed to be my escape, but instead, it became another arena for humiliation. When I first saw Bianca Harrison in that lecture hall, every buried memory I'd worked so hard to forget clawed its way back. She was surrounded by a small entourage of perfectly dressed girls, all giggling as if the world belonged to them. Years had passed since Crestwood High, yet nothing about Bianca had changed, not the way she walked, like the floor owed her gratitude, nor the icy superiority in her eyes when they landed on me. "Clarissa Lane," she said, feigning surprise. "Didn't think scholarships reached this far." The same mockery, just wrapped in older skin. I clenched my jaw, refusing to rise to the bait. I had promised myself I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me break ever again. Bianca and her friends quickly became the center of attention in the business program. Their laughter echoed through hallways, their designer handbags and luxury cars turning heads wherever they went. They threw lavish parties that half the department attended and posted pictures captioned "Future CEOs," as if destiny had already chosen them. Meanwhile, I arrived on the bus, carrying a worn-out backpack and dreams, stitched together by sheer will. But I reminded myself that I wasn't competing for attention, I was chasing purpose. Still, it was hard not to notice how easily doors opened for Bianca. Professors knew her last name Harrison and treated her with the quiet respect that wealth demands. One afternoon during a group project, I overheard her bragging about her father's company, Harrison Textiles, one of the largest manufacturing firms in the region. The name stuck in my mind like a thorn. I didn't realize then how deeply it would later intertwine with my fate. For the first few months, I stayed invisible, sitting in the back rows, focusing on grades and keeping my head low. But talent has a way of shining through, no matter how much you try to hide it. During a business strategy competition, I presented a proposal on sustainable textile production using recycled fibers and low-impact dyes. An idea I'd been nurturing since joining the entrepreneurship club. It was raw but promising, and my passion caught the judge's attention. Bianca's team, on the other hand, presented a polished but predictable luxury brand pitch. When the results were announced, my team won first place. The room applauded, flashes from cameras blinding me for a moment, and for once, I felt seen not as the poor girl, but as someone who had earned her space. The victory changed everything. My name appeared in the campus newspaper with the headline, "Scholar Student Redefines Sustainable Fashion." For the first time, I felt like the world was tilting slightly in my favor. Professor Daniels congratulated me, saying, "Clarissa, this is just the beginning. People are watching you now. Don't let it scare you, let it push you." But while one side of the campus cheered for me, another side watched with jealousy sharpening like knives. Bianca couldn't stand it. She smiled in public, but her eyes told another story, a storm brewing behind. Perfect mascara. A week later, rumors began circulating. People whispered that I'd fabricated my background for sympathy, that I'd lied about being poor to win attention and grants. Some even said the scholarship was a charity handout from a guilt-ridden donor I'd manipulated. It spread fast, poisoning the air around me. In study groups, people's eyes lingered longer. Conversations stopped when I entered a room. At first, I tried to ignore it, burying myself in work. But one afternoon, while I was shelving books in the library, I overheard two students murmuring about me. "She's probably faking it," one said. "You can't be that smart and that poor. Something doesn't add up." Their words sliced through me like glass. I went home that night and cried into my pillow, furious that Bianca still had the power to humiliate me, even after all these years. When I confronted her the next day after class, she looked almost amused. "Clarissa," she said sweetly, "you know how people talk. I can't control that." Then she leaned closer, lowering her voice. "But maybe next time, you should be more careful with what you share. Some stories just sound desperate." Her smirk was the same one from Crestwood, the one that made me feel like dirt beneath her shoes. I walked away without replying, but inside, something ignited, not rage, not sorrow, but an icy determination. I realized Bianca thrived on reaction. Silence, I decided, would be my weapon. Instead of fighting her rumors, I poured my energy into creating something tangible. I formed a small team of students who, like me, came from modest backgrounds and had something to prove. Together, we built a refined version of my sustainable fabric proposal and entered a regional entrepreneurship competition. The process was grueling, sleepless nights, budget failures, creative disagreements, but I felt alive. My team believed in me, and I refused to let them down. When we presented at the regional finals, standing on that stage under the spotlight, my hands trembled, but my voice didn't. I spoke about innovation, responsibility, and the power of resilience. By the time I finished, the room was silent. Then came the applause, not polite, but thunderous. We won. My name was printed again, this time in a local business journal. Clarissa Lane, the face of ethical innovation. I watched Bianca's reaction from across the hall when she saw the article pinned on the department board. Her expression was unreadable, but her jaw tightened ever so slightly. I knew she couldn't stand that the girl she used to mock for her torn shoes was now being recognized for brilliance. She doubled down on her gossip, whispering to anyone who'd listen that I was milking a sob story. But it didn't matter anymore. For once, her words couldn't touch me. Success was louder. A few weeks later, I was studying in the common room when I received an email that made my heart skip. It was from the HR department of Harrison Textiles, Bianca's father's company. The subject line read, "Employment opportunity, junior analyst position." I blinked, reading it twice. Attached was a formal offer letter with generous pay and growth potential. The message stated that my work in sustainable production had caught their attention and they were eager to bring me on board. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, my mind spinning. Was it genuine recognition or a setup orchestrated by Bianca? The irony was almost poetic. The company that once represented everything unreachable was now extending a hand. But deep down, I felt a strange pull. Maybe this was fate handing me the first card in a much larger game. As I held the printed letter in my hand later that night, my pulse raced with both excitement and unease. I hesitated before signing that offer letter. Working for Bianca's father might be the key to my revenge, or the trap that ruins me. On my first day at Harrison Textiles, I realized I was walking straight into my enemy's empire. The company's headquarters stood like a monument to arrogance, towering glass walls reflecting the city skyline. Polished marble floors echoing with the footsteps of people who believed they belonged among giants. As I walked through the revolving doors that morning, wearing my best thrift store blazer and a heart full of determination, I couldn't help but feel the irony. Years ago, Bianca Harrison had mocked me for my worn shoes. Now I was stepping into her father's world, ready to learn everything I could from the inside. After graduation, the offer from Harrison Textiles had seemed like a dream come true, or perhaps a dangerous gamble I couldn't resist. I accepted it not out of admiration for the company but out of curiosity and quiet ambition. The idea of working for the empire that had once symbolized everything out of my reach felt like reclaiming something stolen. I told myself this wasn't about revenge, not yet, but about understanding the machine from within. I was placed in a small department under operations management, far from the executive suites where real power moved. My job involved shadowing supervisors, learning inventory systems, and preparing reports that most people ignored. It was monotonous at times, but I absorbed every detail. I watched how materials were sourced, how budgets were manipulated, and how inefficiencies quietly drained profits. Most of my coworkers treated me like an intern who would fade away after a few months. I let them underestimate me. It made observing easier. Bianca occasionally appeared at the office, sweeping in like a gust of perfume and entitlement. She wasn't officially employed yet, she was shadowing leadership, as her father liked to say, but she acted like a queen inspecting her court. The first time she saw me there, she blinked, her expression flickering between surprise and annoyance. "You?" she said softly, her voice laced with disbelief. "Didn't think you'd actually show up," I smiled politely. "Why not? I work hard." She tilted her head, smirking. "We'll see how long that lasts." Then she walked off, her heels clicking like punctuation marks of power. I kept my head down, refusing to rise to her bait. Every day, I learned something new: how contracts were negotiated, how supply chains were managed, and how employees at the bottom often knew more about efficiency than the ones in suits upstairs. My diligence didn't go unnoticed. Within weeks, I caught the attention of Mr. Lambert, a senior executive known for his sharp eye and old-school discipline. He was one of the few people at the company who still cared about substance over show. One afternoon, he called me into his office, a quiet space lined with books and vintage blueprints. "You've got potential, Miss Lane," he said, peering at me over his glasses. "Most interns fetch coffee and scroll their phones. You're taking notes on everything. Why?" I hesitated for a moment, then answered honestly. "Because I want to understand how this company works, every detail." He smiled faintly, the kind that carried both approval and curiosity. "Good answer. Curiosity builds leaders. Keep it." From that day, he became my silent mentor. Under Mr. Lambert's guidance, I was given more responsibility. I began reviewing production reports, identifying delays and wasteful spending. One afternoon, while analyzing supply chain data, I noticed a recurring issue: an outsourced dyeing process that cost nearly double the in-house alternative. I proposed shifting production back locally with a detailed cost analysis. Mr. Lambert presented my findings in a meeting, crediting me openly. The change saved the company thousands within a month. For a brief moment, I felt validated, like all my effort was finally visible. But in the corporate world, recognition is a fragile thing. Weeks later, Bianca joined a project meeting and presented a new efficiency plan. As she clicked through her slides, I felt my stomach tighten. It was my idea word for word, chart for chart, but my name was nowhere on it. Mr. Lambert's brows furrowed, but he said nothing. After the meeting, I confronted him quietly. "You saw that," I said. He sighed. "I did. But you need to choose your battles, Clarissa. She's the boss's daughter. People like her always win the short game." I nodded, hiding the anger rising in my throat. I didn't argue. Instead, I began keeping records, emails, drafts, notes, everything. I wasn't going to fight her yet. I was going to outlast her. In the months that followed, I continued my work, improving small systems wherever I could. I built relationships with floor supervisors, learning the language of workers who had been invisible to management for years. They respected me because I listened. I learned that the real heart of any company wasn't in its boardrooms but in the hands that turned its wheels. Slowly, my network grew, and so did my understanding. Outside of work, I lived frugally in a tiny studio apartment, saving every penny I could. The thought of starting something of my own had taken root, a vision of a company that would treat innovation and ethics as partners, not opposites. I began sketching designs again, late at night, jotting down ideas for eco-friendly textiles and sustainable production lines. The more I saw how Harrison Textiles operated, the more I realized it was built on outdated systems and greed. It wasn't just inefficient, it was rotting from within. Then one evening, as the office lights dimmed and most employees left, Mr. Lambert appeared at my desk. His expression was unusually serious. "Clarissa," he said quietly, "I need to show you something." He led me to his office and pulled out several confidential reports. "These are the company's quarterly projections," he explained. The numbers were staggering in all the wrong ways. Losses hidden behind creative accounting, mounting debts, supplier disputes. He leaned back in his chair, his voice heavy. "We're running out of time. The board doesn't see it, or they don't want to. Poor leadership is killing this place." I sat there, staring at the spreadsheets, feeling the weight of his words settle like cold steel in my stomach. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. He gave a weary smile. "Because you're the only one here who actually pays attention. And I think you should know the ship you're on might be sinking." That night, after everyone had gone, I stayed behind at my desk. The hum of the air conditioner was the only sound as I opened the financial database and dug deeper. The more I read, the clearer it became. Harrison Textiles wasn't a powerhouse. It was a crumbling giant pretending to stand tall. Decades of arrogance had hollowed it out. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the numbers, the flickering monitor casting shadows on the walls. That night, I stayed late at the office, staring at the financial reports and realized Harrison Textiles was bleeding to death. If their empire was crumbling, I would build mine stronger from scratch. The night I discovered how deeply Harrison Textiles was sinking, I couldn't sleep. The numbers kept flashing in my head like a warning sign. I realized that no matter how hard I worked there, I was merely patching holes in a ship destined to sink. I'd spent years studying their flaws, learning their systems, and understanding what greed did to a company's heart. If I stayed, I'd be buried under someone else's failure. But if I left, I could turn everything I'd learned into something new, something honest. So I made my decision. Quietly, with no farewell party or big announcement, I submitted my resignation letter to Mr. Lambert. He didn't seem surprised. "You've got bigger plans, don't you?" he asked with a faint smile. I nodded. "Then go do them," he said simply. "And remember, real success doesn't roar, it builds quietly." Those words stayed with me. I walked out of Harrison Textiles that afternoon with a single cardboard box of belongings and 1,000 ideas spinning in my mind. The first few months were brutal. I started Clarissa Lane Designs from my tiny apartment, armed with little more than my savings, a used laptop, and a dream that seemed far too big for the space it occupied. I applied for every small business grant I could find, pitching my concept of eco-friendly textiles to anyone who would listen. Most didn't. Some told me sustainability was a trend that wouldn't last. Others smiled politely before rejecting my proposals. Rejection became routine, but so did persistence. Professor Daniels was the first to believe in me again. When I told him my plan, he leaned back in his chair and said, "It's about time. You've been preparing for this for years." He helped me refine my business proposal, connected me with potential investors, and even helped me secure a small innovation grant. It wasn't much, but it was enough to rent a modest workspace and buy my first fabric machinery secondhand. The smell of metal, the hum of machines, it all felt like freedom. Still, the early days were harder than I'd imagined. There were nights I worked until dawn, covered in fabric dust, calculating expenses with trembling hands. Orders were slow, and debt was fast. I skipped meals, took freelance accounting jobs, and used every ounce of creativity to keep the business alive. There were moments when I thought about giving up. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's worn hands and heard his voice saying, "Keep going." That was enough. A few months in, Nora came to visit me. She looked around my cluttered workspace, smiled, and said, "You're really doing this." When I told her about the long nights and rejections, she didn't hesitate. "Then I'm joining you," she said. "You need someone who can talk people into believing what you already know." And just like that, she became my co-founder. Nora handled marketing, outreach, and public relations, while I focused on production and development. We were an unlikely team, but we balanced each other perfectly. Our first big break came almost by accident. A small boutique in Seattle took a chance on our sustainable fabrics. They loved the texture, the colors, the story behind it all. They ordered again, then again. Slowly, word spread. We weren't just selling fabric, we were selling integrity. Nora built our online presence, showcasing behind-the-scenes videos of our ethical production process. People began to notice. Emails from independent designers started pouring in, asking about collaborations. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. A well-known, eco-conscious influencer, Maya Rhodes, featured our fabrics in her video, praising our revolutionary material with a conscience. Within a week, our website crashed from too much traffic. Orders tripled overnight. I remember sitting at my desk, staring at the flood of notifications, my heart pounding. After years of scraping by, we were finally being seen. I called Nora, who screamed so loud I had to pull the phone away. That night, we celebrated with cheap takeout and laughter that echoed through the office until sunrise. Over the next 5 years, Clarissa Lane Designs grew from a small startup into a recognized name in sustainable manufacturing. We expanded our operations, hired a dedicated team, and opened partnerships with several fashion houses looking to go green. Investors began reaching out to us, not the other way around. I went from pleading for funding to turning down offers that didn't align with our mission. Our company became known for transparency and innovation, the very things Harrison Textiles had abandoned long ago. Success didn't make me arrogant, it made me cautious. I knew how quickly empires fell when pride replaced purpose. So I stayed grounded, visiting factories, talking to workers, and making sure our values never faded. Every milestone reminded me of the girl who once swept grocery store floors and dreamed of more. She was still there inside me, reminding me never to forget what it felt like to have nothing. One rainy morning, I was sipping coffee in my office, reviewing a proposal, when a headline on the business newsfeed caught my eye. Harrison Textiles faces imminent bankruptcy amid mounting debts. My cup froze halfway to my lips. I read the article twice. It detailed poor management, loss of contracts, and the resignation of key executives. The once mighty empire was collapsing. I felt no joy, no vindication, just a deep, quiet satisfaction. It wasn't revenge, it was justice delivered by time itself. I leaned back in my chair, whispering to the empty room, "You built it on arrogance. I built mine on truth." Still, I couldn't help but think of Mr. Lambert. I hoped he had managed to escape before the ship went under. As for Bianca, I assumed she was somewhere far away, living the life she'd always bragged about. I hadn't seen her in years, and I liked it that way. My life was peaceful now, filled with work that mattered and people who respected me. But fate, I've learned, never stays quiet for long. It was late one evening when my phone rang. I almost ignored it. It was an unknown number, but something made me answer. "Hello?" I said. A familiar voice came through the line, brittle and hesitant. "Clarissa," she said. My heart skipped. I hadn't heard that voice since college. "It's Bianca Harrison." For a moment I couldn't speak. I just stared at the caller ID flashing her name like a ghost from my past. Her tone was nothing like I remembered. There was no arrogance, no condescension, only a thin layer of desperation barely hidden beneath politeness. "I was wondering if we could meet," she said quietly. "It's about the company." I looked out the window at the city lights glittering below, a slow smile curling on my lips. The irony was delicious. When I saw the name on the caller ID, Bianca Harrison, I almost laughed. Years ago, she mocked my rags. Now she was begging for a meeting. When Bianca's name appeared on my caller ID that night, I almost didn't answer. My instinct was to let it ring out, to let her sit in silence wondering if I'd pick up. But curiosity is a powerful thing, especially when fate comes knocking from the past. I answered, and her voice was a fragile echo of the girl I once knew, hesitant, stripped of pride. "Clarissa," she said, "I need your help. Please. It's about the company." That word, "please," caught my attention. Bianca Harrison didn't plead. Not back, then. Not ever. We agreed to meet at a downtown cafe the following afternoon. I arrived early, my mind steady but alert. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. The polished perfection she once flaunted was gone. Her tailored suit hung loosely, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You look successful," she said, her voice brittle. I offered a polite nod. "I've been busy." There was no malice in my tone, just calm acknowledgement. She got straight to the point. Pride couldn't afford small talk anymore. "Harrison Textiles is in trouble," she admitted. "We've lost major contracts, suppliers are cutting ties, and we can't meet production costs. I heard about your company, your sustainable materials, your supply chain efficiency. We need what you've built, Clarissa. We need your help." She paused, looking down at her coffee cup, unable to meet my eyes. "Our father refuses to modernize. He doesn't understand that times have changed. I thought maybe we could partner." For a brief second, I almost pitied her. But then I remembered every laugh, every insult, every time she'd made me feel like I was less than nothing. Now she was here, asking for salvation from the very person she once crushed under her heels. I kept my composure, folding my hands neatly on the table. "A partnership?" I said lightly. "That's a big request, Bianca. Why me?" She looked up, desperation flickering in her gaze. "Because no one else can fix this," she whispered. "And I know you can." I didn't answer right away. I simply watched her, the way her fingers trembled slightly, the way her voice wavered when she said the word please. There was power in that silence, a balance that had shifted without either of us saying it aloud. "Let me think about it," I finally said. Her shoulders relaxed, as if that single sentence had given her hope. We exchanged polite goodbyes, but the weight of history hung between us like smoke. When I returned to my office, I asked my finance team to pull data on Harrison Textiles. The numbers told a story of decay. The company was drowning in debt, millions owed to suppliers, machinery outdated by decades, and production output dropping fast. Their assets, though valuable, were mismanaged. As I scrolled through the reports, realizations struck. This wasn't a company to save. It was a company to acquire. The thought electrified me. For years, I had built my empire from scraps, fighting tooth and nail to prove my worth. Now, the empire that once looked down on me was within reach, vulnerable, desperate, and for sale if I played my cards right. I spent the next week consulting with my investors, running projections, and preparing a takeover proposal. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about legacy, about completing a circle that had begun in a dusty classroom decades ago. When I presented the idea to my board, there was a moment of silence. Then my lead investor, a sharp-eyed woman named Evelyn, not the forbidden names, but let's adjust slightly, let's call her Camille, smiled and said, "A full acquisition? That's bold." "I like bold." The others agreed. They trusted my instincts. I had proven myself too many times for them to doubt me now. Days later, I arranged a formal meeting with the Harrison board. It was held in their grand but fading conference room, the air thick with tension and arrogance. Bianca was there, sitting beside her father, who looked every bit the part of an aging king clinging to a dying throne. His voice carried that same condescending tone I'd heard in Bianca years ago. "Miss Lane," he said, "I've read your proposal. Generous, yes, but unnecessary. We'll manage our recovery internally." His confidence was a mask. I could see the fear behind it. Bianca tried to interrupt, but he silenced her with a glare. I kept my tone even. "Mr. Harrison, your debts outweigh your assets. Your suppliers are pulling out. In 6 months, you'll be liquidating." He bristled. But I continued, calm and steady. "I'm offering a fair deal. My company has the infrastructure and the sustainability models you need. You can either partner with me now or watch someone else buy you for scraps later." The room went quiet. Bianca looked torn between hope and humiliation. Her father's jaw tightened, the realization dawning that he was cornered. He didn't like losing to anyone, least of all a woman he considered beneath him. But business doesn't care about pride. After 2 days of silence, I got the call. "Miss Lane," a voice from their legal department said, "the board has voted to accept your proposal." I walked into Harrison Textiles not as an intern, not as a desperate girl trying to prove herself, but as its new CEO. The employees, who had endured years of instability, greeted me with cautious optimism. I promised transparency, innovation, and fair wages, things they hadn't heard in decades. Within weeks, morale improved. The factories that once groaned under inefficiency began to hum again. The name Harrison Textiles stayed for now, but under it, a quiet transformation began. Bianca, however, disappeared from the public eye after the takeover. I assumed she'd moved away, too ashamed to face what had become of her family's empire. I buried myself in work, rebuilding the company piece by piece, turning it into a model of ethical manufacturing. My story had come full circle, and for the first time, I felt peace. But peace, I've learned, rarely lasts. One evening, after a long day of meetings, I returned to my office to find the lights dim and the air unusually still. My assistant had already gone home, and I was about to leave when I noticed a figure standing by the window. My heart skipped when I recognized her silhouette. Bianca turned slowly, her eyes red, her face pale. She wasn't the woman I'd met at the cafe. She looked broken, fragile in a way I'd never thought possible. "I know I shouldn't be here," she said softly, stepping forward. But I didn't know where else to go. I stood in silence, watching the woman who had once ruled every room she entered now standing before me, stripped of her armor. "Please, Clarissa," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "I have nowhere else to go." Her voice cracked, and for the first time, the echo of her old arrogance was gone, replaced by something raw, something real. The tables had truly turned, and the past had come home to kneel before me. For years I dreamed of this moment, the power to destroy her or forgive her. When Bianca stood in my office that night, trembling and defeated, I felt time fold in on itself. It was as if the 15-year-old version of me, the girl with torn shoes and tear-streaked cheeks, was standing beside me, watching. For years, I'd imagined what I'd say if I ever had the upper hand. I thought I'd be cruel, sharp, merciless. But as I looked at her, I saw not the girl who mocked me, but a woman who had been broken by life the same way I once had. I gestured for her to sit. "You should tell me why you're here," I said quietly. Bianca sank into the chair opposite me, clutching her handbag as if it were the last remnant of her past. Her voice was low, trembling. "Everything's gone, Clarissa. My father, he lost everything. The house, the cars, the investments. He's been hiding in Florida, trying to salvage what little he can. I stayed behind, but the debts, they swallowed me too. I'm broke. She gave a bitter laugh. Imagine that. Bianca Harrison. Broke. Her eyes welled up, but she quickly wiped them. I came here because I didn't know where else to go. I'm not asking for charity. Just a chance to start again. I leaned back, my gaze steady. You, remember how you used to talk about people like me? I asked softly. Her eyes fell to the floor. Yes, she whispered. And I hate the person I was. I was spoiled, cruel, blind. I thought money made me better than everyone. I was wrong. The confession hung in the air between us, raw and real. For a long moment, I said nothing. I let the silence do the work. Part of me wanted to reject her, to let her feel the sting of helplessness she once forced me to endure. But another part, the wiser part, saw something different. I had already won. I didn't need revenge anymore. My success was proof enough. You know, I said finally, life has a strange way of teaching lessons. Maybe this is yours. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I deserve every bit of it. I stood, walking to the window, watching the city lights flicker below. The skyline that once felt unreachable now stretched beneath me. I thought about everything I'd fought through the long nights, the ridicule, the hunger, the grief. I had climbed every rung alone. I turned back to her. If I give you a position here, it won't be glamorous, I said. No executive privileges, no shortcuts. You'll work like everyone else, from the bottom up. If you're serious about rebuilding, this is your chance. Her eyes widened in disbelief. You'd really do that after everything I did to you? Yes, I said simply. Because I don't want to be the kind of person you once were. The look she gave me was one I'd never seen before, genuine gratitude mixed with shame. Thank you, Clarissa, she said, her voice breaking. You have no idea what this means. Over the next few weeks, Bianca began her new role in the production department, under a supervisor who had no idea about her past. I made sure she received no special treatment. She came in early, stayed late, and for the first time, learned what hard work truly meant. The employees were curious about her, some skeptical, but she earned quiet respect with her persistence. I watched from a distance, proud of my decision. This was better than revenge. This was justice in motion, dignified, humbling, and transformative. Word of my decision spread, and soon the media caught wind of the story. Articles praised me for my leadership and compassion. From bullied teen to CEO, Clarissa Lane redefines success, one headline read. Another called me a symbol of resilience and grace. I didn't seek fame, but I couldn't deny the satisfaction that came with being recognized not just for success, but for mercy. My employees looked at me differently too, with respect that came not from fear, but admiration. Nora and I celebrated one evening after a major company milestone, the reopening of the largest Harrison factory, now under our new sustainable system. She raised her glass and said, "You've done it, Clarissa. You've turned pain into purpose." I smiled, feeling the truth in her words. "It was never just about me," I replied. "It was about showing that integrity wins, even when the world laughs at you." Not long after, my mother's health began to decline. Years of hard labor had taken their toll. And though I had the best doctors care for her, her strength faded with each passing week. One night, as I sat by her bedside, she reached for my hand. "You made it, my love," she whispered weakly. "Your father would be so proud. You kept your promise." I could barely speak past the lump in my throat. "You were my reason, Mom," I said softly. She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "Then keep being kind. The world needs that more than success." Those were her last words before she drifted peacefully away in her sleep. Her passing left a quiet ache in my heart, but it also gave me clarity. Everything I'd achieved was built on her sacrifices and my father's dreams. I decided to honor them by expanding our company's foundation to support single parents and underprivileged students. I wanted to create the opportunities I once wished for. Meanwhile, Bianca continued to work diligently. I saw her transform not into her old self, but into someone humbled, grounded. One day, she came to my office, nervous but smiling. "I got promoted," she said. "Supervisor of quality control." I smiled back. "You earned it." She paused, her eyes soft. "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I deserved it." I nodded. "You gave me plenty of reasons to give up on you, but everyone deserves a second chance." For the first time, we shook hands not as rivals, but as women who had both been reshaped by life. Months passed peacefully. The company thrived, our reputations soared, and for once, I felt content. Then, one rainy afternoon, while sorting through my late mother's belongings, I came across an old wooden box tied with faded ribbon. Inside were photographs, letters, and a small envelope I hadn't seen in decades, the one that had contained my scholarship letter. I smiled, tracing the edge of the paper, remembering how it had changed everything. But when I looked closer, something caught my eye. The donor's signature at the bottom, something I'd never noticed before. My heart stilled. The ink had faded, but the name was unmistakable. The scholarship had been signed by Mr. Harrison himself. I sat there, frozen, the room spinning slightly around me. The man whose daughter had mocked me, whose company I now owned, had once unknowingly paid for the education that changed my fate. The irony was almost cruel, almost beautiful. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. When I opened the old envelope in my mother's box, I froze. The scholarship had been signed by Mr. Harrison himself. The man who destroyed my family had once unknowingly saved my future. The words echoed in my head as I sat in my quiet study, staring at that old scholarship letter. The paper yellowed with time, but the signature Arthur Harrison was still clear enough to read. I traced it with my finger, my mind spinning with disbelief. The man whose negligence had taken my father's life, the man whose wealth and influence had shaped my years of humiliation, had been the very person who funded my escape from poverty. I laughed softly, not out of amusement, but out of awe. Life, I realized, didn't deal in coincidences, it dealt in circles. All those years I had burned with anger toward the Harrisons. I had never imagined this truth hiding in plain sight. Mr. Harrison hadn't known who I was when he made that donation. It was probably just another act of wealthy philanthropy for tax benefits or public image. But still, his money, his empire had financed the education that allowed me to rise above it all. The irony was exquisite. I leaned back in my chair, the late afternoon light spilling across my desk, and for the first time, I didn't feel hatred toward him. I felt gratitude, twisted, unexpected gratitude. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my father, about how he'd died working for that same company, about how his death had fueled my determination to succeed. If Mr. Harrison's donation had unknowingly helped me, maybe it was proof that even tragedy can birth purpose. Maybe the world's cruelty wasn't always punishment sometimes, it was preparation. I whispered a quiet thank you to my father, wherever he was, and promised him I would lead with compassion, not vengeance. The next morning I called Nora into my office. She had been with me since the beginning, through every high and low. When I told her about the letter, she blinked, speechless. "You mean the Mr. Harrison?" she asked. I nodded. She shook her head slowly. "That's unbelievable. What are you going to do?" I smiled faintly. "What I've always done, build something better from what was broken." Over the following months, I launched the Lane Foundation, a scholarship and mentorship program for underprivileged students. Our mission was simple: to give others the same chance that one letter had given me. I made sure each recipient knew they weren't being pitied, they were being invested in. Watching those students walk across the stage in their graduation gowns years later became one of the greatest joys of my life. It felt like healing, one life at a time. Running the company became different after that discovery. I was no longer driven by the ghosts of revenge. Instead, I was driven by the power of renewal. I implemented programs to improve worker safety, fair wages, and mental health support across all divisions. Factories that once echoed with exhaustion now buzzed with pride. I visited production floors often, shaking hands with employees who were shocked that their CEO remembered their names. "We're not just building textiles," I told them during one meeting. "We're weaving futures." They applauded, not because they had to, but because they believed in what we stood for. Bianca stayed true to her word as well. She became one of my most diligent employees, quiet, dependable, and humble. The arrogance that once defined her had vanished. One afternoon, she came into my office with a file in hand, her tone respectful but confident. "I think we can optimize the distribution routes if we switch logistics partners," she said, laying out her analysis. I listened, impressed. "You've come a long way," I told her. She smiled, not with pride, but with peace. "You taught me what leadership looks like," she said softly before leaving. It was strange somehow. Her growth felt like a part of my own redemption. Through it all, Nora remained my closest ally and friend. Together, we expanded Clarissa Lane designs into international markets, partnering with ethical brands and environmental initiatives. We often joked that our names were now mentioned in the same circles that had once been closed to us. But behind every deal, every accolade, there was an unspoken truth: we hadn't just built a company, we'd rewritten our own stories. The defining moment came the following spring, when I was invited to an award ceremony recognizing pioneers in sustainable business. As I stood backstage waiting for my name to be called, I thought of my parents, of that small house where dreams once seemed too big to fit. When they announced Clarissa Lane Entrepreneur of the Year, I walked onto the stage to a standing ovation. The lights were bright, but I wasn't blinded by them. I was grounded, humbled. During my speech, I didn't talk about profits or power. Instead, I told my story: the girl who had been laughed at for her torn shoes, who'd worked nights cleaning grocery stores, who'd lost her father but found her purpose. "Success," I said, "isn't about what you gain. It's about what you give." I used to think revenge would heal me, but it didn't. Compassion did. When I stepped off the stage, people were in tears. The next morning, newspapers ran headlines like, "From Humiliation to Humanity, the Story of Clarissa Lane." But I didn't care about the attention. What mattered was that my story was proof that pain could become power without turning bitter. A few months later, I returned to Crestwood High for the first time in decades. The school looked smaller, the walls worn with age, but the memories came rushing back: the laughter, the humiliation, the long walks home. I met with the principal and donated a fund specifically for underprivileged students, ensuring that no child there would ever be mocked for what they lacked. As I stood in the old hallway, I could almost see my younger self walking by, clutching her books, eyes full of quiet determination. I smiled at that memory and whispered, "You made it." Outside, a group of students gathered around me, curious and wide-eyed. One of them, a girl, with a patched backpack and shy smile, asked, "How did you become so successful, Miss Lane?" I crouched to her level and said, "By believing that where you start doesn't define where you end up. Remember that." She nodded, her eyes bright with hope, and in that moment, I felt something close within me, an old wound, finally healed. Life had indeed come full circle. The empire that once symbolized my pain was now a platform for good. The people who once mocked me were either gone or transformed, and the world that once seemed cruel had turned into a canvas I could finally paint with grace. That night, as I walked through my home, I paused by the small box that held my father's old work gloves and my mother's sewing needle. I placed the scholarship letter beside them, a symbol of the strange, beautiful symmetry of fate. I realized that destiny isn't about luck, it's about endurance. It's about taking what breaks you and shaping it into something that builds others. I looked out the window at the city lights, whispering the words that had carried me through every storm, the words that defined my journey and my triumph. They mocked my torn shoes once, but those same shoes carried me straight to the top. I've learned that life has its own way of balancing the scales. The people who once laughed at my struggles now work under the company I rebuilt from their ruins. But instead of bitterness, I chose grace because revenge may satisfy the moment, but forgiveness strengthens the soul. In the end, I realized my worth was never defined by wealth or status. They mocked my torn shoes once, but those same shoes carried me straight to the top. So before you go, take a second to breathe and think, have you ever been underestimated, only to rise higher than anyone expected? Stories like this remind us that life always comes full circle, even when no one believes it will. If Clarissa's journey touched something in you, share it with someone who once doubted you. And maybe, just maybe, they'll see how life can change. Tell me in the comments if you ever got the chance to face the people who once humiliated you. Would you forgive them, or let them taste their own medicine?